All right, good. What I'm going to do is go over functional disconnect syndrome, also known as hemisphericity. Realize that you have two sides to your brain called hemispheres. If it's a review, that's great. If not, I want to make sure that you're able to understand the whole concept of hemisphericity, also known in the literature as functional disconnect syndrome. Okay, what happens is we have two sides to our brain, our hemispheres. And if you look here, I'm just going to kind of trace out what I already have up here. These represent the two hemispheres. And what you want to look for is that the brain is firing equally from side to side. In other words, the brain, both hemispheres should be at a high level. We're going to look for a dampening of that hemisphericity. And one of the ways you can check it is through mapping what is called physiological blind spots. And it gives you a representation of your visual field. And the visual field should be equal from side to side, and they should be the same size, and the bigger one is indicative of a hemisphericity on the opposite side of the brain. Okay, so just a little FYI. So now we found the functional disconnect syndrome. This is the mechanism of why it wreaks havoc in the body. Okay, so I want to go back to this here again. The hemispheres should communicate with each other. If one's dampened, they can't do that. The brain can't do that. So what happens is now the side that's dampened or less functioning will not be able to fire down and stimulate what is called your PMRF, your pontine medullary reticular formation. Pons, medulla, reticular means web-like structure formation. What that basically is, if you look here, I did a diagram that represents, here's the two hemispheres up here, okay? This is the mesencephalon or midbrain, and we have a pons and we have a medulla. What happens is the PMRF basically is this diamond-shaped area, and that's the reticular formation. So reticular just means like web-like structure. So that encompasses or controls the brainstem. What happens is if you have one side of the brain firing at a lower level compared to the other, it's going to not be able to stimulate this PMRF to do its job. The PMRF has four major functions. We're going to focus on one aspect of it, and we want to talk about its firing down to what is called your IML, intermediate lateral cell column, also known as your sympathetic nervous system, and that's what, T1 through L1. And what that controls is your flight or flight mechanism. So if you get that in a small capsule, the PMRF fires down to the to inhibit. Its job is to inhibit the flight or flight mechanism. If the flight or flight mechanism is not inhibited, what happens? Your heart rate stays up, your cholesterol levels stay up, your blood pressure stays up, and your sugar levels stay up. Why? Because you're stuck in a survival mechanism. Okay? What it also does is, if you're in a flight or flight mechanism, now you're in that flight or flight mechanism, so the brain never goes into what is called the rest or repair aspect. Okay, and that's your parasympathetic involvement. So we talked about the sympathetic flight or flight mechanism. Parasympathetic is rest and repair. So what's going to happen is the brain is going to shut off learning. And this is why people complain of like mental fog. It can be sexual dysfunction, dryness in women, ED in men, because the parasympathetic system is the rest and repair system. So your body is never allowed to go into that phase of neurological involvement. Okay, so what happens is if you're stuck in this fight or flight mechanism, learning is shut off. Things like ADD, ADHD, autistic spectrum disorders, Tourette's syndrome, all can be the results. So do we say we treat these? No, we help the hemisphericity or functional disconnect syndrome. We take care of that, and this process is able to balance, and it's not, learning is not shut off, and subsequently the brain fog. Also what happens is that blood to the core is shut off because the body's in a flight or flight mechanism. It's going to shunt blood to where? The muscles. Okay, because again, it's flight or flight mechanism. So it's going to be a vasoconstriction inside centrally. So what's going to happen? If you have blood vessels that are constricted, you're going to develop things like migraine. Okay, migraines are pre-TIAs, transient ischemic attacks, and TIAs are pre-strokes. So it's important for the migraineurs to be checked for this functional disconnect syndrome, because there's a high correlation between the PMRF not firing because of the functional disconnect syndrome or hemisphericity and subsequent development of the migraines. All right, let's see what else can we talk about. If you're stuck in the fight or flight mechanism, you're in a state of anxiety. We talked about the sympathetics being from T1 to L1, L2. I made a mistake. It should be L2 earlier. And then how this shows up, this is a big one, is that your blood pressures will be unequal from side to side. Very rarely, unless you go to a functional neurologist, will they be checked from side to side. So it's real important to have that check, the blood pressure, because they give you a reading of what the blood pressure is, and then also is it an issue with the fight or flight mechanism not being modulated properly. All right, let's see if I missed anything else as far as this goes. But understand there's 4 things the PMRF does. That this is just one. So I'm going to do 4 separate videos on that. This is the one I need to get to a lot of people because of the migraineurs that we spoke of. All right. Just double checking here. I think we kind of covered what I needed to, and so I'll be making some more videos on the other 3 aspects of the PMRF and its functioning. So understand brain hemisphericities, and brain's not doing its job because it's dampened because of the functional disconnect syndrome. Thanks.